Hey everyone, welcome to the Catholic Influencers Podcast, full extended interview for Season 12, Episode 10. I'm Augie Angrisano, and if you've ever thought of faith as a puzzle, well, we're here to help find those pieces together without you losing any under the couch this time. Today, we're talking with Chris Bray, a Canadian musician and speaker who's on a mission to demystify the Catholic faith for those from other denominations. The gospel for this week is Mark 10, 17 to 27. And if you're ready for more, don't forget to catch that full episode with Alyssa, Justine, and Father Rob. Let's get right into it and welcome Chris. Chris, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast this week. It's such an honor to have you. Thanks for sharing with all of our listeners.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. First question that I love to ask, just to kick it off, is who is Chris?
I don't know. Sometimes I still ask myself that question. Like, what do I want to be when I grow up? You know?
Yeah, right.
No, I'm a Catholic speaker and musician. I got my start in the Christian music world, and that kind of evolved into more of a speaking role in Catholic churches and parishes and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I've been making music for like 15 years or so. I've recently written a book called Resounding Truth, and I travel around and give parish missions and speak at conferences and Catholic schools and that sort of thing.
And I know you're located in Ontario. Is that where you're from as well?
Yeah, Ontario, Canada's home. Yeah. My wife and I met the first day of college, and so we kind of settled down in the area that she grew up, and so that's home base for us.
Oh, how good, man. Well, I just would love to hear a little bit about your upbringing, and I want to hear when Jesus came into the picture for you. Was that at a young age? Like, who did you think Jesus was when you were a teenager, and who do you think he is now?
Right, I didn't know who he was. I knew we grew up in a Catholic family, and we did discipline really well, and we knew all the rules and the memorized prayers and all of that stuff. And I was involved in things. I was an altar server in a music ministry and youth group. But I had my sort of Jesus encounter closer to in my teens, and it was at an event at our church where it was just a moment in need. I recognized that, like, no matter how hard I try, I just couldn't overcome all the obstacles in my life. And through that time of prayer, I encountered Jesus for the first time, and it really changed my life and set me on a whole new course and trajectory. And through that, part of that encounter was through this prayerful worship music that I had never really experienced before. And I think God used that to soften my heart. And so now I have an appreciation for how he can use that in such powerful ways.
Now, was songwriting something that was in your life before this moment, or was the encounter with Jesus and the songwriting, did it all kind of happen around the same time for you?
Yeah, once I got connected in my faith, it was around that same time that I was learning music, taking some guitar lessons. And so I got plugged into our local music ministry, and we formed a high school worship band called Metanoia Going Yahweh.
Nice.
And it was
Sounds epic.
So bad. Like, we were the worst. Like, it was just awful music, and our lead singer, she graduated high school and went off to college and university, and so I was the least tone deaf out of everyone in the band. And so I kind of got thrown into the role of, like, okay, now you're going to be the singer. I'm like, oh, okay.
There you go.
And so it was just awful. And we would host these like praise and worship nights, and, people would come, obviously not for the music because it was just so bad. But, it was through those opportunities that the Lord gave me an opportunity to refine and nurture some of the gifts that he had planted. Awesome. But over the course of that time, I got involved in Life Teen at my parish, and then I started writing more music myself, and that kind of led to my first album, and it was a bit of a journey and progression that way.
Which project of yours or song brings you the most joy? I know for me, it's sometimes just the last one that I wrote is the one that I really enjoy, but is there a specific song that maybe the moment of writing it is just really memorable, or how it hits the audience and how it connects? Which one is just really stand out for you?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's been a lot of seasons in my life where God has demonstrated his providence and just how amazing he is. As far as something that I'm particularly proud of, during the season of COVID, when everything was shut down and all of my events were canceled and all the rest of the world was sitting at home, I remember kind of having a conversation with God, saying like, "What's the deal? Like, how am I supposed to? I'm not supposed to be out there on the road doing these events. Like, what am I supposed to do now?" And I really got the sense during that season that He was trying to tell me, like, in every season, in every trial, I'm calling you closer and closer to me. So I kind of took that and I wrote a song out of it. And I remember playing it for my kids. We were sitting at the dinner table and I strummed them the song. They're like, "Dad, that's really cool." I'm like, "Oh, thanks, guys." So I sent a demo to a friend of mine who's in Christian radio, and he's like, "Dude, you got to record that." And the problem is that we were in lockdown and I couldn't go in. I couldn't even get to the studio. And so I decided that I was going to try and record it myself. And so, my wife and I, we've got 5 kids. And our house is loud and messy sometimes. You know what I mean? And so it's like, where am I going to record this? And so I went into the garage, set up kind of like a temporary studio space, and tried to record, but I could hear all the cars going by and the crickets, and I could hear everything, right? And so my last shot was like, okay, I'm going to take all of this gear, I'm going to pack it inside our minivan, inside the garage, and hopefully that's going to be enough insulation. And that's where I actually recorded this song. Closer and closer, and wow. Through that was something that I had never done before, and so I sent it to my friend in radio, and he said, "I think people need to hear this song," and so I sent it off to Christian radio, and praise God, they started playing it and embracing it, and so I was very thankful for that. I mean, that was just a reminder for me that, like, even in the worst of circumstances, that God can take something and use it, in a powerful way, despite my inability and despite all of the setbacks. So that was just a good reminder for me personally.
There you go, man. Sometimes God just takes over, man. And if it's anointed and if it's meant to happen, it just gets out there in His own way. So that's cool how that story came about. And that sounds so cool.
Right?
I want to circle back though a little bit. Like, you said you have 5 kids, man. That's crazy, man. I want to hear about how that came about and that whole story. You said that you met your wife in college?
Yeah. Second day of college, I met her. Yeah, we were waiting at the city bus stop to go to college. Yeah, and that's where we met.
Did you find it difficult to embrace family life? I feel like when I started, man, I had no idea what I was doing, and my brain, the career puzzle and everything was like priority. And then it's just, God's just been working on my heart to just show me that this is where all the growth and all of the grace is. Did you experience that at all as well? Or was it something that you just, you were all in from the get-go?
Well, of course, right? Like, because you're never ready to have kids. And you're like, you might think you are, and then you just are like, wow, my goodness, this is crazy and wild and amazing and like life changing. But at the same time, like, I'm constantly reminded through all of that. Like, people always ask the question, how do you balance ministry life and family life, right? And keep those. And I don't have the answer for that. I'm still constantly trying to balance those two things. But what it is a reminder for me of, though, is that of my primary vocation is that as a husband and a father. And if my job, my ministry work, anything else is getting in the way of that or detracting for that or making that come into question, my family life or my fatherhood, like that, then that's when I really need to make sure I got my priorities straight, right? And put things into check. And if my ambitions are getting in the way, and my creative endeavors are getting in the way of family life, and that's a problem, right? I got to reset. I got to refocus. And so it seems like every season I have an opportunity to be reminded of that, of what I say yes to, what I have to say no to, what God is calling me to do in the context of ministry, and then also in family life. So,
how beautiful, man. I find God just breaking open how much He loves me through how much I love my kids. Has God, shared any insights to you and in your walk with Him just through parenting those 5 beautiful children?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say 2 things. One is, especially being a dad of 5 girls, like, God really used that to soften my heart in a way that I never foresaw. I never thought He would, and it's just, what a blessing. Like, they take care of me so well. They just love me, and they've shown me like a softer side from someone who was maybe once more prickly, and
Beautiful.
the other thing too is, I'm just reminded of his goodness in all of that. He's coming to see their talents and their gifts. I'm reminded that perhaps my most important job isn't the song that I write or the talk that I give or the event that I go, and it's not any of that stuff. It's like, I want to raise kids that just love Jesus with their whole heart. I want to raise like great kids, and I want to pour into them. And what they're going to remember about me isn't like, songs charting on the radio or how many whatever events I did. They're going to remember the times that I poured into them and loved them and gave them the attention. And so I'm just trying to remind myself of that too, of the importance of that.
Let's transfer into the gospel for this week. When you read it, what did God speak to you, and what would you like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I'm just like, that's an important question that is asked, right, of Jesus right from the get-go. Is like, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Like, that is the question. And what I find really striking for me is like, well, Jesus knows this person's heart, right? He can see right through them. He knows the answers that's going to be, and he's like, well, I followed the commandments. Like, what else must I do, right? And then Jesus gives the challenge to them of like, here's the one thing that I know that you're not willing to give, or that you're holding back from me. It's like, are you willing to sell it all? Like, give it all away to the poor and those who are in need, and then come and follow after me. And that's like the full surrender moment to God. That's like, he wants everything. Like, he doesn't want to just have Sunday mornings. He doesn't want to just have like the little bit of tithe that we give, and the throw in the donation basket. He wants everything. And I'm just so struck by that. Like, that's the invitation that we're given. And then the tragedy of it is, it says that he walked away because he was full of wealth, right? And Jesus goes on to share about how it's difficult, right, for those who have money, for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the analogy that he uses, and the disciples that are with him are like, well, like, okay, what? Then who stands a chance, right? And I also love that too, right? I love how they're like, well, they're like, what? Well, like, what are the odds? Like, how are we ever going to make it there? And Jesus is like, you know what? For men, it's perhaps impossible, but for God, nothing is impossible. And I'm just like, man, that's grace. That's all of the times we try and micromanage God. And he's like, but all you really need to do is just receive what I have for you. Trust in me, come and follow. And he says that right there in the passage. Like, leave everything behind, come and follow after me. And then that's the invitation. And it actually, it kind of reminds me of my own journey into ministry. If you don't mind me sharing,
Go for it.
I remember when my wife and I were discerning getting into ministry, and I was working a real job, Monday to Friday, and just doing ministry on the side, and it was getting busier, and so I was traveling on most weekends, and we were starting to have kids, and so life was just getting crazy, and we were realizing that we wouldn't be able to do this, we wouldn't be able to sustain it, and we needed to either go into ministry full time, or we needed to give it up and just be like a normal family, where we just, you know what I mean?
Yeah, wow.
And so I remember we'd been praying about this and trying to discern it, and we decided that we're gonna give God an ultimatum a little bit. We were going to ask for a leave of absence from my job so that we could test out ministry. And whatever the answer was, that's what it's going to be. And we were going to be at peace with it. And so I remember walking into my boss's office this one particular day, and he was aware of my ministry work and what I was doing, and he was a supporter of it, and a champion for it. And I remember walking into his office and saying like, hey, this is what we want to do. We want to take 6 months, try out this whole ministry thing. Do you think I could just have a leave of absence, unpaid, to try this out? And I remember he laughed in my face, and he's like, "You can't do that. Like, you can't just like take 6 months off from your job and expect that it's going to be there waiting for you. Like, that's crazy, right?" And I remember just walking away from that moment, thinking like, "Well, I guess that's the answer, And God knows that I'm not just going to quit a great job and leave. Like, I have primary vocations, a father and a husband. I got to provide for the family." And it was about 2 weeks later, my wife and I found out that we were pregnant with our third child.
Oh,
and
wow,
in Canada, you get 9 months of parental leave, unpaid, but you can take 9 months off from your job, and you are guaranteed your position when you get back. And I remember just thinking like, praise you, God. Like, like I can take this time, like not just 6 months, I can take 9 months now and test out this ministry thing. And like, for me, that was kind of like God saying, I've got you. Like, you can trust me. I'm going to be good. And we haven't looked back since. And so when I read this passage from the Gospel of Mark, I was just constantly reminded of the so many numerous times in my own life where he's just been inviting for me to surrender to him, and to trust him and hand over to him because he's got a way.
The question that I kind of wanted to propose to you, just based off of this gospel and everything, has Jesus ever asked you in your own life to do something that you did not want to do? You were just like, I don't want to do that. That does not sound fun whatsoever. It looks different for everybody. Is there something in your life that you feel like, it's just like, this is hard, but I'm going to do it anyways. And choosing Jesus and the struggle of that, like, can you open up and to share a little bit about that for yourself?
I don't know if there's been anything in my life that has seemed too difficult that I really held on to it. I think one of the things personally in my own life, with my personality, I like to micromanage God sometimes, and I like to come up with a plan and present it to the Lord and be like, see, God, isn't this a wonderful idea? Would you bless it? And I think there's many times in my own life that I take on the worry and the stress of my schedule or finances, or like, I got to make sure that, when really those are even moments that he's inviting for us to hand over to him. Yeah. Like, if he's truly called us to something, he's going to make it possible. And I in my own life, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. Like, I don't know how to, I don't know. Like, this is not my skill set. Like, I don't know how to book events, or I don't know how to like put songs on. Like, I don't know. That's not my skill set. But somehow, if God wants it to happen, he's going to make it happen. And that's what he has done. And that's what he's going to continue to do as long as he's called us to it. And so I don't know. I'm just reminded of that and that wrestle. And I think in the context of this gospel reading, right, it's especially when it comes to money and finances, it's like, are we willing to hand it all over, everything, and it might mean like living below our means for a while, or it might mean sacrificing something, or going out on a limb and walking and trusting in faith that he's going to provide. But he is good. He's a good God, and he's if he's calling us to something, he's going to see us through.
No, absolutely. So I do know that you just released a book. Can you share a little bit about what it is, what's the book about, and what was the heart behind it? How did it all come to be?
Yeah. It's called, I have it here. It's called Resounding Truth. And it's my story, actually, of a little bit of getting into ministry, how God used, because actually when I first got into ministry, it was because Christian radio had sort of embraced on my very first album. It did well. And so I started getting these invitations from Protestant churches. And it seemed like none of the Catholic churches wanted anything to do with me. Really? But wow. I was getting all these invitations to serve and minister in the Protestant world, because Christian radio is like 99% Protestant radio. And so I would go to these various different types of denominations, and I would see how they would worship and how they loved God and the love of the scriptures and how they did community so well. And I wanted that because I didn't really see that where I was in my own Catholic parish. And I wanted what they had, but at the same time, once they found out that I was this Catholic going around all these churches, they were they were full of questions. Like, well, like, first of all, like, we didn't think that Catholics knew how to worship. And don't you worship Mary? And didn't you add 7 books to the Bible, and all of these different misconceptions about the faith that I realized I had no idea how to answer. And so I went on this journey trying to discover, trying to answer the question really, what did the first Christians believe? Because that's what I want to do. And it sent me on this back to the early church fathers and reading their writings. And the more that I was challenged in my own faith, the more that I grew to appreciate the why of the Catholic faith that I didn't really have growing up. And so that's what my book is about. And also just helping people to be able to share the faith well and effectively with others.
Man, that's so cool that God's put you in a position to demystify the Catholic faith to those circles. But I don't think I've ever really heard of a Catholic songwriter who was embraced outside of the Catholic Church first. You know, and then coming back to the Catholic faith, or I guess like in the performance scene. Like, do you perform in Catholic settings now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There was, I would say the first probably 4 or 5 years of my ministry, full-time ministry, it was mostly non-Catholic churches that would invite me to come. But then there was this transition that happened where I think God put me on that journey to get an appreciation for being able to reach people that are from different faiths or people that have fallen away from the Catholic Church. To be able to have an appreciation for why and where they're at and some of the obstacles. And then once that happened, it's sort of like he opened up the doors for me to be able to go to all these different Catholic parishes and to help communicate that appreciation to people. You know, like what, your grandparents or your aunt and uncle, or these people that have left the church, like maybe start by asking, like meeting them where they're at and seeing like, well, why did you leave? You know, like, well, what are some of the things that you're struggling with? Or what are these misconceptions? Let's talk about them, you know, and not a combative way and not in an argumentative way, but in a way that points us back to the fullness of truth. And so now that's pretty much all that I do. 99% of the time I'm in Catholic parishes or for conferences or in Catholic schools, just trying to help those fallen away Catholics, those people, lukewarm Catholics like I was for so many years of my life, to help encounter Jesus profoundly.
No, man. Again, it's just so cool that you're just being a voice, just kind of bridging that gap for people who may have left the faith and aren't too sure. And you're like, through your Instagram channel and everything, you're just breaking it down, you know, breaking down those barriers. Last question. What's God speaking to you in your own personal prayer life? What is he saying to you in this season?
It's a tough one. I think he's been reminding me lately, of the both and what I mean is, I think a lot of times we can get wrapped up in the experience of our faith, of like when we go to a conference or some uplifting event or in the moment of worship and adoration. You know, we have this experience. I don't want to call it a feeling because it's not about feelings, but we have this experience with the Lord, and then we also at the same time we have these beautiful devotions that we compare, you know, whether it's the Chaplet of Divine Mercy or the Rosary or the prayers of the day or you know, any of the great saints, and we can forget that those are meant to work together. And when we get too focused on the devotions, they can become this ritual, this empty ritual, this thing that we just check off our to-dos. Like, yep, I did Rosary, check. And when we do just the experience, we can untether ourselves from the habit and the routine of the spiritual life. And so I think what God's been reminding me of lately and speaking to me is like, you know, like let's bring those back together. Let's allow those to work together. Like we need the discipline, we need the routine, but it's not the routine in and of itself. It's what it points to, right? That it's meant to draw you closer to me, to Jesus, right? To my heart. And so I think he's just been just leading me in this particular season of my life.
Yeah, I had that like mountaintop, really communal experience a lot growing up, like back in the States, you know, going to like the Steubenville conferences and everything like that. It was a real shock to the system, you know, coming here to Australia and that really not being around as much or not being available. And it shook me for a little while. And it was like, you know, how much of my faith was about that mountaintop. And so then it really was like building towards that, you know, just hiding in your room and choosing God on your own, which I feel like you do need both though, you know, like if there's this one, it's just that one just, I don't know, it feels a bit too hollow. But if you just have this one of just being alone in the room all the time, it just gets too lonely and difficult. You know, I think there is like a bit of like of both are very important in the walk.
Yeah, and it reminds me kind of the Exodus, right, where Moses would go up the mountain and have that like profound experience on the mountaintop, but then would have to go back down into the valley and travel amongst the people and live in community. But then how do you feel sustained through that, right? It's the manna. That's what God gives and how he leads with his Holy Spirit leading and guiding. and then, going back up the mountain again and having that encounter. So it's like this constant cycle. I love how you said that. You articulated it so beautifully.
Well, Chris, it's just been such an honor having you on the podcast this week. Thank you for sharing with all of our listeners your thoughts on the gospel. Where can we find your work if we want to, follow up on that book or just follow up on what you're doing, man?
Yeah, probably the best way is on my website, chrisbraymusic.com. And I'm also on Instagram. I put out apologetic videos every day. And so you can check that out as well. And the book's on Resounding Truth is on Amazon.
Too good. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That's all for today. And if you liked this episode, give us a like, subscribe, and maybe even share it with that friend who's always asking you about the Catholic faith. Just sending them our podcast would save you some time. For an in-depth look at the gospel, check out the full episode of the Catholic Influencers podcast, available wherever you listen. And don't forget that the CatholicInfluencersPodcast.com is where all of our social media links are. We'll see you guys next week.